Diolch yn fawr a croeso I Brifysgol Glyndŵr. Os dim byd fel pwyser gael ei ffilmio a gael cyfwyddiadau gan y crew ffilmio I rhoi rhywun o dan bresio. Welcome to Glyndŵr University and on behalf of the university and the Institute of Welsh Affairs, can I welcome you all to the event this evening. I'm going to say a bit more to present the event this evening, and I'll do it in Welsh, so those who don't speak the language might want to have their headphones. Wel, mae'n bleser iawn croesawu chi yma I Brifysgol Glyndŵr. Andrew Parry dwi'n gweithio i'r Brifysgol fel ymgynghorydd gweithredol i'r Is-Gynghellor, ond hefyd dwi'n gadeirydd a cangen Gogledd Cymru o Sefydliad Materion Cymreig. A felly swn i'n licio croesawu chi gyd yma heddiw fel yn gwisgo y ddwy het yna. Mae Sefydliad Materion Cymreig wedi bod mewn bodolaeth ers rhywbeth fel 7 mlynedd a 20. A'r cangen yn y Gogledd wedi bod yma ers dros 10 awr. A dyn ni wedi datblygu lot o pethau yn y cyfnod yna. Ond un peth sydd wedi digwydd yn diweddar sy'n yn gyffrous iawn ydy'r penodiad Lee Waters fel cyfarwyddwr y sefydliad. Cafodd Lee benodi dechrau'r flwyddyn ac ers hynny mae wedi wneud cyfraniad mawr tuag at datblygu gweledigaeth yr sefydliad a'r rhoi arweiniad I ni datblygu digwyddiadau yng Nghymru ac yn y bedig yma yn y Gogledd. Felly mae'n bwysig iawn I ni gael I gefnogaeth o, a dyn ni'n falch iawn I bod I wedi cyrraedd. Un o'r digwyddiadau dyn ni'n ceisio wneud I ddatblygu'r ddarpariaeth yma yn y Gogledd ydy'r nosweithio fel hyn, sef noswaith siop coffi mae'n galw yn gyffredinol. Mae y syniad ydy gael sgwrs a trafodaeth ac wedyn I gael pawb I ymuno yn y trafodaeth a gofyn cwestiynau a gymuno yn beth dyn ni'n sôn amdano. Felly, gai jyst rwan cyflwyno ein siaradwr gwadd heno. Cafodd Leanne I ethol i'r cynulliad yn 2002 ac wedyn yn ethol yn Arweinydd Plaid Gymru yn 2012. Hi di'r arweinydd cyntaf yn dod o tu allan i'r cydanle Plaid ac wedi rhoi gweledigaeth newydd i'r Plaid a dyn ni'n gobeithio heno clywed lot am I weledigaeth am dyfodol y Plaid a Chymru. Gai hefyd cyflwyno Lee Waters fel ydy cyfarwyddwr newydd y sefydliad. Mae Lee wedi cael brofiad helaeth o'r holi gwleidyddion. Mae ganddo lot o wybodaeth am gwleidyddiaeth yn Cymru a felly gobeithio mi allwn ni gael trafodaeth diddorol iawn heno. Fel ydy, croeso chi gyd ymuno yn y trafodaeth ar ôl I Lee gorffen. Diolch yn fawr.
Well, diolch. Thank you all very much for coming. And thank you especially to Leanne for agreeing to have a conversation. I hope what we'll get a sense in the next hour of just is who you are and not an usual confrontational interview as I used to do in my old job, but more of a conversation to get a sense of who you are as well as what you think. I don't think many people appreciate the pressure politicians are under. There's been a report recently about the size of the Assembly and the workload of Assembly members. Just on a human level, how do you cope with the hours and the pressure given that you have a family?
The hours are long and they are widely varied as well. You can be expected to be away for, as I will be now, 4 days at a time from this one trip up north, and clearly that does put some pressures on family life. But I think that most people who are working are under those pressures anyway, to be honest. I'm very lucky that I've got a fantastically supportive partner, and also I bought my house in the same street as my mother lives, which is very, very handy when you run out of sugar or when the washing machine breaks down, or if you need emergency childcare, picking up from school and that kind of thing. And also, because I live in the street where I grew up, it's not just my parents who are there, but I've already got neighbours and a ready-made community for any other eventualities as well. So I do feel lucky having that sense of support network around me. But to be honest with you, I think politics can be a tough job, but I think that there are plenty of other jobs out there that are equally as tough. And I see myself in a fortunate position because my partner is not working outside the home. So his entire workload is running the home and our allotment and doing the childcare. And so in that sense, I'm in a more fortunate position than many others when two parents are working full-time and trying to juggle all the other things on top.
But you got elected, or you went into politics after you had your daughter. I remember I remember you bringing in your daughter into the assembly when she was very little.
I was elected into the assembly in 2003, and Cerys was born at the beginning of 2005.
Okay.
And actually, I did take her in at 6 weeks old to vote on tuition fees back in early 2005. When that was a very contentious issue at the time, and my vote was required in order to defeat the then Labour government on its tuition fee policy, which we then later went into government with Labour under One Wales, and the policy that we have now was born within that government.
My question was, you clearly decided to go into politics before before you'd really had experience of having children. Had that situation been different? Had you had a child, would that have put you off going into politics? Is it more difficult for people with children who are young, who don't really know how tough it's going to be being a parent and being a full-time politician? Would that have changed things, do you think?
I don't know. The thing is about becoming a parent for the first time is that you don't know, you haven't got a clue what's involved. So it's very difficult to say, I went into politics when I did and I had my child when I did. It's very difficult to say, had the circumstances been different, would I have taken different choices? I don't think I can actually answer that question. I think probably I would still have opted to go into politics because it is such an important part of my life, and it fires me. It's what motivates me to get up in the morning, I suppose. So I can't really imagine doing any other job now.
At what age did that fire take you over?
I remember feeling very strongly about political issues during my teenage years in school. I had an excellent history teacher who encouraged us as pupils to question and think outside the norms. And so questions around things like nuclear weapons, animal welfare, those sorts of things were important to me. Peace was a key driver at that age. Although I think when you're in your teenage years, you've got a lot of ideas that haven't yet fully formed, and so it doesn't all quite connect up until later when you've done some more reading and discussing with people. But yeah, I remember getting angry about injustice at quite a young age, around probably 13, 14 years old.
And you've said before that one of your role models, if I can use that phrase, was a Communist Party councillor from your area called Annie Powell.
Annie, yeah.
What was it about her that inspired you?
Annie Powell was a woman from the Rhondda. She represented the ward that I went on to represent as a councillor, and she was clearly an outsider. She didn't fit with the hegemony that was in the Rhondda all through my growing up, and you could argue to a large extent is still there. So she was prepared to stand up against that hegemony and challenge it. And I think for me, I saw something very attractive about that, not fitting in, challenging conventional wisdom, being a little bit different, being a woman politician in a very male-dominated political environment was something that I thought was very interesting. And it just so happened as well that my grandmother was taught by Annie Powell many, many years previously, and my grandmother said that she was one of the best teachers that she'd ever had. So all of that combined enabled me to, when asked at one point to name a political role model, Annie Powell's name was one that came to the forefront of my mind fairly quickly.
And you identified with her as an outsider?
In political terms, if you're young and you're a woman and you're in the Rhondda and you're not in the Labour Party, then you are an outsider.
But is that still part of your sense of self in politics? Because the way you described her then really described you for certainly the formative period when you were in the public's eye as being a bit awkward, not being afraid to stand up. Famously, when you were thrown out for being rude to the Queen.
I don't accept I was rude, but
well, the presiding officer took a different view.
Yes.
But you were willing to step outside and be unconventional and be a bit awkward and be an outsider. And it struck me when you were describing her, it seemed to be describing you.
Well, you can take two different approaches in politics, I suppose, and you can just take the view that you will fit in and you will go with the crowd and you will do what is expected of you, or you can say, hang on a minute, I came into politics because things weren't right, and I certainly take the view that if I see something isn't right, then it deserves to be challenged, and sometimes that can put you in the position of being the outsider. Now, that can be difficult on times, and I've come into trouble for being outspoken on times. But nonetheless, sometimes I think that if you believe in something very strongly and you believe it to be right, then you almost have a duty to speak up and make your voice known, because otherwise everybody just assumes that everybody's just in agreement and then that there's no difference of opinion, and there are very few issues where there is complete consensus.
And now the paradox is that you're now the party establishment. You're the leader of your party. You've gone from being the rebel to the establishment. And how do you come to terms with that? How do you deal with that?
That's an interesting way of framing the situation. That's not quite how I see it. I think that the leadership election in Plaid Cymru was a very interesting process, and the process involved, for me anyway, going around the country, speaking to groups of Plaid Cymru members in various halls up and down the country, and going through a process of dialogue, of working out where we wanted to go as a party, what the vision was, and how we would get there. And I felt during that process that many people were excited about the politics that was being discussed. We were getting good turnouts to meetings. There was a serious engagement in the issues, and I really do feel that it's invigorated Plaid Cymru. We also had an increase in the numbers of members joining the party around that time as well. So I think what happened was that the membership of Plaid Cymru decided that they wanted to take a more radical turn, and they wanted to put the question of autonomy much more at the front of the agenda, and linking in that with questions around the economy, which had been blown open by the banking crisis. And being able to knit those various elements together to come up with a coherent strategy for the party was something that was really invigorating. So I think what we've done is we've created a more radical Plaid Cymru as a result of that process, and I don't see it as being a process that has turned me from a radical into an establishment figure, really.
But I mean, just by the very position you now occupy, you have to take decisions. You sometimes have to discipline party colleagues. And just in terms of the role you now occupy, that's slightly at odds with your outsider's instincts that you've developed over the years. I'm just wondering, is there a tension? How does that make you feel? Do you feel uncomfortable with that?
Well, again, it depends on your approach to leadership. And for me, I don't see myself as being in the role of dictator, where I have to bring people in and you know, take them to task. I see the leadership of Plaid Cymru as being a collective leadership, that if we are all pulling in the same direction, then there's a sense of purpose. We all know where we're going. We've got a plan. It's a case of implementing that plan and bringing people alongside with us. Sometimes things won't go according to plan, and there will be difficulties and differences and tensions. But what I've said is that I hope we can resolve those as adults in a sensible manner, and that we can be united when we present that position that we've got to the public.
Well, that is radical. Treating politicians as sensible adults, grown-ups. That's not my experience of many of them.
Well, so far, that approach seems to be working okay. Now, I'm not saying that it'll be without its hiccups into the long term. There are bound to be difficulties. But I do think that if by trying to foster a sense and a culture of we know where we're going and we're all pulling in the same direction, then it's culturally more difficult for people to go outside of that. And they'll be challenged then hopefully by others within the organisation and not just me as the leader.
Did you go into that leadership election expecting to win?
No. No, I didn't. I was surprised at the level of support and the level of excitement around the ideas that were put forward. And it became apparent through the process of the election campaign that something was going on. But I was very surprised with the level of the victory at the end. And to be honest with you, 18 months later, I'm still a little bit surprised at that. But the feedback that I'm constantly continuing to get is that we're on the right track and we're going in the right direction, and most members of the party seem to be quite happy with the direction that we're going in at the moment.
Because what's interesting, I suppose, your predecessor took your party into government for the first time in its 80-odd-year history. And Plaid now feels quite far away from government, not just because of the seats, but just because of the tone, and that's as much to do with the tone of the governing party as it is about your tone. But I just wonder whether or not, having been somebody who wasn't expecting to govern, having been somebody who's by instinct an outsider, somebody who is a campaigner and quite radical by instinct, does that make you sort of ill-suited for doing the compromises necessary to get Plaid back into power, which surely must be the aim?
I don't think so. The aim absolutely is to get back into power. I want that to be on our terms next time, and I want us to be the biggest party and the biggest party in any future coalition. Now, the reason that I want us to be in power is not to have power for power's sake. It is so that we can advance the position constitutionally and economically. Ultimately, I've made no secret of the fact that I support independence for Wales in the long term. There's a huge amount of work that we've got to do before we can get there, and one of the things that we must do is be in government and present an economic plan to people in Wales to show that, to concretely demonstrate that people will be able to be better off and greater autonomy. And we can only do that within government. So I'm absolutely clear. We are going for broke for 2016. We are aiming to become the biggest party. You've got to have high ambitions. I fully understand that if you want to achieve something, you've got to almost set ambitions way higher than expectations would allow you to, and then because that's the only way that you've got a chance of going forward. So being in government is what we're all about now, and that's why the effort that we're putting into creating our programme of government and consulting on that is going to be one of the top priorities for the party over the coming years.
Well, you've criticised Carwyn Jones's government for lacking ambition, for him being very flippant and arrogant at First Minister's question time. It's a government, after all, without a majority, so the opposition parties could kick him out at any one time. And yet, in the last assembly, the opposition parties were united. They were able to, the party leaders had a good personal relationship. They came very close to forming a rainbow coalition. And yet now, even though the government doesn't have a majority, that seems like light years away. What's changed?
Well, a couple of key personnel have changed. I think that the Conservatives under Nick Bourne were moving in a more pro-Welsh, pro-devolution direction. I think they've slipped back since they've had a new leader. In terms of the minority government, they are a minority government, and sometimes they don't behave like a minority government, but we've just had a budget deal which they relied on opposition parties in order to get their budget passed. So, and on legislation as well, they will rely on opposition parties to participate in order for them to get their legislation through. But the only way that the Labour government in Cardiff Bay could be brought down is if there was an alternative government and people were prepared to form that alternative government. And I've said very clearly when I was running for the leadership of the party and before that I don't see a place for Conservative ministers in a Welsh government. I think for most people in Wales outside of Conservative areas, that would be something that would be a step too far for most people. The Conservatives are still extremely toxic, certainly in the part of Wales that I come from, in the Rhondda. And the vast majority of people simply would not be able to understand such an arrangement. So I've ruled that out. I mean, it is a matter for members of Plaid Cymru to determine who they would form a coalition with. But as the leader, I would need to make a recommendation to the National Executive, and that is a recommendation that I simply wouldn't be prepared to make.
So that leaves two other alternatives, a Labour Liberal Democrat coalition.
Open to either of those.
So you're consigning yourself to opposition under that
No,
scenario.
I'm going to be the government and I'm going to be the First Minister.
Okay, but under this current assembly,
Right, yeah.
or a Plaid Cymru Labour coalition, can you ever see yourself in government with Carwyn Jones?
I wouldn't rule it out, but I would say the government that we've got at the moment and that we've had since 2011 is lacking in ambition. I don't think there's enough seriousness about the economy. I think that that government has a very lukewarm, and I'm putting this generously, attitude towards business, and business is going to be key to transforming the Welsh economy. And I don't see any ambition on the part of the government to create a stable arrangement. They are happy with the way things are going, and so I think we'll just have to play it by ear and see how things go. At the moment, as I say, we've got some concessions out of the budget. We will be getting concessions out of future pieces of legislation. We're already having discussions, for example, around the housing bill to see what support we can offer the government there and what concessions that we can gain back. So there is a lot of debate and discussion and horse trading going on behind the scenes. And for the moment, the position works for us, and I think it works for the government.
You do have an option. You can either vote him out, which you've said you won't do because you want to do a pact with the Conservatives, or you can go in and in your own terms strengthen the government, but you won't do that either.
Well, we need to be really clear what we want to achieve as a government, and I think the strategy for us now has to be working out our clear programme of government and presenting that to the people in 2016. There's no point in going into government and taking power for power's sake unless you've got an absolutely clear idea about what you want to do with that. And by the 2016 election, we will be in that position. We'll be very, very clear. And I'm confident that when people are presented with what we've got to offer, that they'll like it and support it.
You've written a really interesting article in the latest edition of the Prospect magazine about poverty for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Yeah. And you said, let me just quote something you said, the big three British parties are united in their desire to put their own needs before those of Wales. All three have accepted an economic system that is designed for the rich and the powerful. So is what you're saying from that if you get independence, if you get a Plaid-led government, that not only will you change the government, you will change the fundamental nature of the economic system we have?
No, if only I could. I mean, the reality is, even if Plaid Cymru were running the government of Wales, we would not be in a position to fundamentally change the economic system. I mean, we're in a global economic system. But what I do think we can do in Wales is create an economic system that is fairer for people and that isn't all concentrated around things like financial services, banking, and all those other drivers that the UK economy is currently built on. And I think we could have an opportunity to have a more acceptable face of capitalism in Wales then, if you like, where there is more a greater role for the voluntary sector, where there is an important role for the public sector, but also private business playing its role as well. And I do think that in Wales we've got a population who believes and recognises the importance of public service, which there are people in other parts of the UK who have that importance as well. But it seems after recent elections that those people are in a minority. I don't believe they are a minority in Wales. I think the centre of gravity of Welsh politics is to the left of the centre of gravity of politics of the UK as a whole. So it gives us a great opportunity to do something different. But at the same time, even if we were an independent country, there is no such thing as an independent country in today's world. Every country is interrelated in one way or another, and that's a good thing with other countries. And so the globalised economic system is something that is pretty impossible to operate outside of.
But what I'm interested in is the language you use. It's very sort of sweeping. It's romantic. It's idealistic. You know, there's this old phrase of Mario Cuomo, the governor of New York, that you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. And you know, you're good on the poetry. But I guess what I was pushing on slightly earlier is that when it comes to the prose, when it comes to joining government and compromising, that's less comfortable for you.
Well, I would agree, right? It's not my natural place to be, but I do recognise that you have to be in power to progress your political aims, and there's no question about that. There is no point simply remaining in opposition so that you can keep the pure view and shout from the sidelines. There's absolutely no point in doing that at all. If you want to get your programme implemented, if you want to see serious impacts upon people, then you've got to be in a position of power and be prepared to take those decisions. And we are.
You are what?
Prepared to take those decisions.
but not anywhere near power. You inherited a party that had been in power, and now it's nowhere near power.
Well, the party that I inherited had taken a severe bruising after being a junior partner in a coalition government. And it was always going to take us some time to recover from that situation, learn the lessons. And I think we are in that coming to the end of that process now. 2016 is going to be the key year for us, and that is why we put in all our effort into being a governing party beyond that.
Now, you've said that you want to be bold, that you want to go for broke, that you're going to stand in the Rhondda. You currently have a safe seat on the list, and you've decided not to stand again on the list, but to fight in the Rhondda and run the risk of losing. Now, since then, the government in Westminster have said they're going to change the law to allow the old system to come back, where you can stand both on the list and in the constituency. So you could, if you wanted, still stand again on the list and stand in the Rhondda.
Well, they haven't changed the system yet, have they?
But they say they're going to before the election. But you know, the language you used when you announced you were going to do that was all about going for broke and taking a bold step. So have you decided what you're going to do about that yet? Are you going to do as you said and be bold and stand in the Rhondda and risk it all, a big gamble, or are you going to hedge your bets?
Well, as things stand currently, the rules are that you can only stand in a constituency or on a list. And when I made the announcement, there was no indication that that system was going to change. So my intention at that time was to stand in the Rhondda, to go for broke, as you say, and defeat the Labour candidate and become the Assembly member for the Rhondda. if the situation does change, and there are no guarantees that they will enable the rule to remain, then I am open to standing on the list as well. Just the same as my colleague Alex Salmon did in Scotland. I think still under those circumstances, I can win the Rhondda. But either way, we will be going for broke and going to win that seat, whatever the situation is with the list.
I fully accept what you say, that when you made that decision, you had no expectation, and I know from speaking to those around you, you genuinely were willing to take that risk. Isn't the danger, given the nature of the rhetoric you used, if you do decide to stand on the list after all, given that you talked in such grand terms about the big risk you were taking, that will be used by others to damage your credibility and say you're just like all the rest, you're going back on your promises. And given that you are trying to have a different USP, of a different kind of credibility as a politician, couldn't that damage the brand?
I'm not convinced about that. I'm sure opposition parties will use all kinds of statements to try and undermine my credibility. That's a matter for them. I mean, the converse could be, if I refuse to stand on the list, aren't you being a bit of a risk taker? Aren't you throwing away? Are you taking a risk that your party perhaps shouldn't be prepared to
But that's
take?
what you said you were going to do. Those are your words. That was your claim. That's the problem.
Under the system as it is, then yes, that is what I will do. But if the system offers a safeguard and I don't take it, wouldn't that be foolish too?
Okay. Now, there is likely to be a Wales bill, because the government have said that they're going to implement the recommendations of the Silk Commission. One of the details is emerging on the Silk Commission is that we're likely to have the power to have income tax powers, subject to a referendum. Do you think a referendum is necessary?
No, I don't. I think that the Government of Wales should be able to take responsibility for raising a material amount of its expenditure without the need for a referendum. But that said, Plaid Cymru has accepted through the process that other major players in this debate have insisted upon a referendum, and so we're not going to stand in the way of that. And to be honest with you, if people in Wales have an opportunity to have a say at every step of devolution and endorses it, then that just gives more credibility to the institution and to devolution as a project.
Now, the way the tax raising powers would work is it would be not like the Silk Commission recommended, to have the power to change individual bands, but you'd have to change them all together. So you'd either cut it all by 1 pence or increase it by 1 pence.
That's right.
Where does Plaid stand on that? Are you likely to cut or raise?
Well, first of all, it's likely that we're going to have 6 UK government budgets before any tax is raised via income tax through the National Assembly for Wales. So by the time 2020 is with us, which is probably the earliest time that we'll be able to have these powers, then who knows what the economic situation will be in Wales. What I'm absolutely clear about is that any Welsh government has to maximise the amount it's got in the tax pot. And there are raging debates about how to do that. Some people advocate cutting some taxes to attract more people in, to pay more into the tax pot. Others recommend raising taxes to get more in that way. So there are plenty of debates to be had around that. I'm clear that I'm not prepared to tie Plaid Cymru's colours to the mast on this so far ahead of that eventuality. But it's in all our interests to just maximise the tax pot.
But you have said on business rates that you would give small and medium businesses a competitive edge by reducing the amount of business rates effectively through business rate relief.
Well, the business rate will come in before 2020. That is something that is more immediate, and it's like the innovation taxes, the nudge taxes that have been mentioned in Silk, and were announced by the UK government this week that we will be getting. We've announced that we'd like to introduce a levy on sugared drinks to pay for 1,000 doctors, for example. So with the minor taxes, I think there's a debate to be had about what will be done with those, but specifically on income tax, then I think that you need to think very, very carefully about what you do with that, because it has such big implications to the Welsh budget, of course. And at the end of the day, people still want public services. So we've got to, that's the point about maximising the tax pot. The more that you've got in that tax pot, the better public services and the better level of social protection we can provide for people. And I believe, and what people tell me, is that people value social protection and value public services here in Wales. Well, if we value them, we are going to have to pay for them.
But you are going to cut business rates.
Business rates, yes, because we...
which will have an impact on the amount of money there is to spend on other things.
The business rate proposal that we've put forward is estimated to cost in the region of an additional £40 million. The reason we want to cut business rates is to stimulate the economy. The aim around that is, if every small and medium-sized or micro business could take on one person, maybe starting as an apprentice and then work into becoming a full-time employee, we could wipe out Wales's unemployment problem in one fell swoop. So if we can create the conditions for small businesses, first of all, to remain viable through this crisis, but then secondly, to build up enough to the point where they can just take on one extra person, then that will have a dent in our unemployment. And so our business rates proposal is all about job creation. And as I've said since I've been the leader of Plaid Cymru, job creation, the economy has to be our number one political priority.
And the other element of the debate around the Silk Commission and devolving extra powers to Wales is devolving power for police and criminal justice.
Part 2. Mm-hmm.
There's a proposal, a plan to have a new super prison in Wrexham, which is estimated will have 3/4 of its inmates from outside of Wales. Do you think that's less likely or more likely to lead to powers over criminal justice to be devolved to Wales?
The problem that we've got in Wales, I used to work as a probation officer, so I do have some professional interest in this, is that our system is not designed to be a Welsh system. So take the prison estate, for example. We've got 2 public prisons in the south, plus a private prison, plus an open prison in Esk, and they're all down there in the south. We've got no facilities to incarcerate women at all. So if you're a woman who's imprisoned, you've got to go to England. We know everything we know about women prisoners is the further you take them away from the families, the more difficult it is for them to reintegrate back into society. The same for youth. We've got young people from the north who are Welsh speakers going over the border to be incarcerated. They're not having services through their first language. So there are a whole host of problems which need addressing. I'm not in favour of anything that further creates that setup, that system, which doesn't meet our needs in Wales. So rather than have one big super prison, I would have much preferred the government to be considering much smaller units spread more throughout the country, and that is a way that we can meet people's needs. So that is the purpose really of devolving the criminal justice system, is to be able to create and tailor the entire criminal justice system to meet the needs of people in Wales, because it clearly doesn't at the moment.
So do you oppose the new super prison in Wrexham?
I do, yes. Yeah.
Okay, one of the questions, this being the Twitter age, I tweeted that we were having this conversation and asked for suggestions of questions to ask you. And one came from Louise Weinsweg, I think I pronounced that correctly, which said, appropriately enough, can digital media help re-engage people with politics? If so, how? You're a keen Twitterer and Facebooker.
Well, I do it for those reasons, to aim to engage people. And I think it does, to a certain extent. What I find, particularly with a younger audience on social media, is that, and I found this over the last 10 years, possibly even since the anti-war movement started up, was that young people, I reject the notion that young people are apathetic to politics. Young people can be apathetic to politicians and political parties, and certainly since the MP's expenses scandal, that has got worse. But I don't accept that young people are apathetic to issues, and I think that people do get very fired up about issues. What they don't see is the connection between political parties, politicians, and sorting out those issues. Because for so many people, what man X with a yellow tie and man X with a red tie and man X with a blue tie, they all sound the same. So what's the point of voting? How can you differentiate between them? So I see social media as a fantastic opportunity for a party like mine who doesn't get a fair airing in the, especially the UK media, which is what's hitting most people, as a way of directly communicating with people to say, look, we're not that bloke with the yellow or the red or the blue tie. We are over here, we're very different. We are putting forward a vision which doesn't sound at all like anything that they are saying. And we are here willing and ready to engage with you. And I get a very positive response to that in general on Facebook and on Twitter. But I do think there's a danger to social media as well, in that I do speak to political activists who sometimes say, oh, right, there's this particular campaign going on. I've clicked like on Facebook, therefore I've done my bit. And it's not enough. It's not enough to just click like on Facebook and think that you've done your bit. That is one part of doing your bit, sharing information, making sure people are up to speed with the issues. But actually, real politics is done outside, at the grassroots level, face-to-face with people in communities, and there is no substitute for that.
You've still got your fair share of men with ties in Plaid Cymru. None of your MPs are women. Clearly a big break forward that the leader is now a woman. Do you hope that by the end of your time as leader of Plaid Cymru there'll be more women AMs?
I do very much hope that there will be more women AMs. I would love to be able to say to you, Lee, that I'm very confident that over the next 10 years there will be more women getting involved in politics. Unfortunately, I can't say that to you because where we are with politics at the moment, and again, I don't want to harp on about the MP's expenses scandal, but I think that was such a defining moment really in politics that has put a lot of people off, and has put especially women off engaging in politics. I've been doing a leaders tour of the country since, probably about a year now, going to various town halls and speaking to people about our vision and trying to get them, encourage them to get involved. And it's overwhelmingly male. Those audiences are overwhelmingly male. And there are issues around things like, women take the responsibility for childcare. It is more difficult to make meetings in the evenings and so on. But getting women to get active in politics is a really big challenge. And what I found very, very difficult is trying to persuade women to actually want to go to Westminster. I don't know whether it's a Plaid Cymru thing, it probably is. Very few of our members actually want to go and live in London. But for women, it's even more difficult again. So we've had some success in persuading women to put themselves forward for assembly selections, but it's been really, really difficult to find women to come forward for Westminster selections. And that's a challenge that I'm going to have to try to address over the coming years, but I don't see any political movement anywhere really in the world that's managed to successfully address this issue without introducing all-women shortlists or mechanisms like that. I've never seen a natural system for getting more women involved. And when we in Plaid Cymru introduced an artificial mechanism to allow the women on the top, the places on the top of the regional lists to be just for women, that's the only time where we've managed to get proper gender balance. So this debate will continue to run and run, but really, unless we have an assembly and even a Westminster Parliament that is truly reflective and looks like society as a whole, then we can't really claim to have democracy.
So would you consider using artificial measures of positive discrimination?
I've always argued that you need them. I believe in an equal society, and in order to get a representative democracy, sometimes I think you have to manipulate the mechanisms to achieve that. So yes, I would be open to that, but these matters are matters for the membership of Plaid Cymru, and certainly I put great store in the members having their say on things like this. And that, the debate has been raging for the last 10, 15 years in Plaid Cymru and in other parties about artificial mechanisms. We haven't resolved that yet, and I'm sure that there will be more debate on this question in the years to come.
Isn't this the chance for the awkward outsider to show a fiery radicalism again?
Well, yes, and I will put forward my views on this. But as in conference, I've got one vote amongst the hundreds of others there.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience for Leanne?
Yeah,
Could you say who you are, please? Could you just say who you are, please?
Yeah, you know, with the changing the powers for tax, the Silk Commission recommended that the Welsh Government could change the levels of tax. The London Government have said, yes, you can, as long as it's locked down. Why? I think that's the term, is it? Lockdown?
Lockstep.
Lockstep. Why do you think that they said, yes, you can have it, but only with lockstep?
I think the reason behind that is Scotland. There's a big referendum coming up in Scotland next year, and the powers that have been given to Scotland over taxation include this lockstep. So my view is that I don't think the UK government could be seen to be giving something to Wales that was more generous than they were prepared to give to Scotland. And I think that we need to bear in mind at all times that everything that the UK government does and says on constitutional matters relating to Wales are always said through the prism of the Scottish referendum, and until that is resolved, then we are kind of playing second fiddle to that agenda, really. That's my hunch.
Okay, any other questions? Again, if you could say who you are, please.
Thank you very much. My name's Robert Jones from Cardiff University. I just pick up on the prison again, and particularly the Welsh Government's position on criminal justice. This year being a massive year for debates on criminal justice. In February, they outlined that they see the devolution of criminal justice as part of, and I quote, longer-term vision for the future of Welsh governance. And on the same hand, Cadwyn Jones has welcomed the super prison in Wrexham. You talked earlier about a lack of ambition. It strikes me as a lack of clarity as well in terms of the long-term vision, what the super prison will actually mean for devolution in Wales. What do you make of the Welsh Government's kind of ambiguous position, and what do you think that, putting it mildly, and what do you think that this super prison, the second largest prison in Western Europe, the biggest prison in the UK, will actually mean constitutionally for Wales going forward?
Okay, two fairly big questions you've asked me there. I think the position of ambiguity reflects the deep splits within Labour on the question of devolution that have been there since time began. And the 1997 referendum on devolution was a reflection of that historic compromise. And I think that the debate around Silk is in that context too, and the debate around the criminal justice system is all part of that. And part of it is driven by the Labour Party's wing of MPs who, how can I phrase this to be kind, who are concerned by losing too many powers about what their role will be in the future. Will it mean that their numbers will be cut? So I think that's the backdrop to the debate. In terms of the prison and the long-term constitutional consequences of that, then the implications are huge, because potentially if we do devolve our own criminal justice system and we're taking prisoners from outside the nation's boundaries, then there are a whole host of questions around who pays for that, where the liabilities are. If we developed an alternative, different system, if we went in a different direction in Wales, how would that have implications for people sentenced in England, and so on. So it's not being very well thought through. And as I've said earlier, my vision of a criminal justice system for Wales is a much smaller units spread wider throughout the country. And I wrote a paper a few years ago called Making Our Communities Safer. And the purpose of that document was to argue the case for the devolution of the criminal justice system so that we could build it on different values. And I used to work as a probation officer. The probation service is being privatised now. By the time we get to the end of the silk process and we're talking about devolving the probation service, I wonder what kind of service we're going to have left. So I'm worried about how long this debate is taking and what kind of criminal justice system we'll have at the end of the process.
You mentioned the paper you wrote on criminal justice. The other big paper you wrote was the green print paper, where you were trying to find solutions for climate change, which also empowered communities and rebuilt local economies. How do you feel about the fact that, and I think you talk about climate change a lot less than you used to, at a time when the science around climate change is getting more and more certain, and its political traction has just collapsed?
Yeah. Well, I noticed the change, I think, around Copenhagen, when there was a huge amount of hope and expectation amongst those of us who were concerned about climate change, that world leaders would come together and come up with a plan that would really take us in the direction that we needed to go. And when that collapsed, it really does feel like something changed politically through that whole process. And I know the Welsh Government, for example, now has rolled back quite a lot on previous climate commitments that were made under the One Wales Government, for example. And so the context of the debate has become more difficult. But as you say, the science is very solid and becoming more solid. And the imperative for us to act is really great. I don't know how, during a recession, we have the debate that enables us to put sustainability and job creation on the same level. And I think that the other thing that's happened as well since the Copenhagen thing is one thing, but the economic crash hasn't helped, because it does seem to be the debate around being jobs at all costs, regardless what they are, regardless whether they're going to be dirty jobs, polluting jobs in the future. So that's a problem as well. But, I mean, climate change hasn't diminished in any way in terms of the importance of it as a political issue for me. And as far as I'm concerned, I see climate change as being something that offers us opportunities to create jobs in the different sectors that we're going to need in the future, and an opportunity to build in resilience into Wales that simply doesn't exist at the moment. So we are so at the mercy of forces outside of our control. World events elsewhere impact on our economy here. So if we are going to have more stability and resilience in the future, then we need to be thinking about what mechanisms we need to introduce into our economy to ensure that those shocks, those external shocks, we can limit the damage to our communities from those in the future. And that's where the green print comes from, really.
So green policies will still have a prominent role in your next manifesto?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Any further questions from the audience?
Bob again.
Bob Gaffey. Yeah, we've seen in the census 20,000 Welsh speakers have been lost 2001-2011. And the present Welsh Government doesn't seem to be doing much to remedy that particular problem about the language. Is Plaid Cymru, have they got any plans to try and encourage the language not to die?
I think what we need to have is a plan for... We're going to create a Plaid Cymru's economic plan. We also need to make sure we've got a plan to ensure the viability and sustainability of communities in the long term, and that's Welsh-speaking communities and non-Welsh-speaking communities. And we've been very clear that it's the economy and the stimulation of the economy that is going to be key to ensuring that people are able to remain in communities if that's what they want to do and have a viable future within them. So job creation and measures to ensure the viability of our communities is something that will be central to our programme of government. We also we have opportunities through the education system, and some of the research that I've been looking at recently around the ability for multilingualism to raise standards in education is quite exciting. And we've seen that if you are bilingual or trilingual or multilingual, then your mind is opened up to other disciplines too, like maths and science and so on. So I think that there's potential there. We've got 2 languages in this country. And if all of our children can be given the gift of bilingualism, and there are huge challenges to achieving that, not least training teachers and so on, and persuading people that it's a good educational thing to do, then I think there's a potential there for us to seriously boost the numbers of people who are able to speak in both Welsh and English. But the cuts are seriously threatening all of this development. I live in Rhondda. Since my father was a child, provision of education has been available for people from the age of 3 in Rhondda. That is now under threat because of the cuts. Children who are currently full-time in school at 3 will be made to go part-time from Easter. The children in Welsh medium education invariably have to travel by bus. Free transport is being removed, and the parents on my daughter's bus stop, because she's in Welsh medium school, with 3 to 5-year-olds are saying, well, my little Johnny won't be going to Bronllwyn in the future because we don't have a car and we won't be able to go and collect him at lunchtime. So I'm going to be pulling him out of there now, and he'll go to the local English medium school. So these are big threats for the future of the Welsh language in Rhondda. I don't know where we're going to have, what the future of it is if these cuts are allowed to go ahead. So there are grave threats of our own making in some ways, because we can choose to continue to provide that education if we think it's important. But clearly the priorities of the local council are as they are, and they are talking about removing that vital service.
Is there a final question?
I'll fight over it.
Do you think the position of the Secretary of State of Wales has been undermined by David Cameron announcing the implementation of Silk One, because he's been known before to be quite vociferous against any more devolvement of power?
Well, any positive constitutional move would be undermining of his position, wouldn't it? Because he's an anti-devolutionist.
Okay. Mark, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, Mark Jones. One of the devolved areas of competence for the Assembly has been health, and health has been a huge issue certainly in North Wales over the last couple of years. What are your thoughts on the way the health service is being run in Wales at the moment, and what would you do differently?
Okay. Well, Plaid Cymru has been very critical of the reconfiguration process, as you know. And one of the things that we insisted on when we went into government as part of the One Wales government was to halt the reconfiguration plans that they had back in 2007. The argument that is being used for reconfiguration is that the current system is not sustainable, so therefore some services have to be removed further away from people. And some of those proposals are unjust because, and I can speak with more familiarity to what's happening in my part of the world, but for example, our local accident and emergency department is one of the ones proposed for closure, and that serves an area with high levels of people without a car and poor public transport links. So there are massive concerns from people about the implications of those changes. We've been told that this has been driven by clinicians because there is a shortage of doctors in particular, but other medics as well. And so there has to be a plan, a long-term workforce plan to ensure that we've got the right number of medics, clinicians, nurses to meet the needs of the population here in Wales. And that's why I put forward in our conference the idea that we would raise money through sugared drinks to cover the costs of 1,000 doctors. Now, I accept it's not as simple as just paying for the doctors, put the money on the table and they will come. There are great recruitment problems. But unless you have a plan, and unless you have a plan to train more and incentivise people to stay, like we did with dentists, under the One Wales government, there was a shortage of dentists. A plan was put in place to recruit additional dentists and incentivise them through pay and training costs and whatever to work in Wales for a certain number of years. There's no reason why we can't adopt something similar for doctors. And in the short term, until we get to the point where we've trained those doctors, because it does take a long time to train doctors, there are temporary measures that we could introduce by looking elsewhere in Europe. Huge unemployment rates in Spain, huge unemployment rates in Greece, and some trips by local health boards to Spain in particular have managed to bring back additional doctors. So more effort on that front. And it could be then, when Spain's economy picks up in the future and we're producing more doctors than we need, Spain can have some of our doctors and we can have a fair arrangement. But at the moment, Wales has fewer doctors per head of the population. We're one of the worst in the whole of Europe. We're way behind the UK average and we're even further behind Scotland. So an additional 1,000 doctors would just take us up to the UK average. It would still leave us way behind Scotland. So I don't think calling for an additional 1,000 doctors is over-ambitious at all. If anything, it's slightly under-ambitious because we should be aiming for Scottish levels, I think.
Well, you've been accused of playing politics on the health service because any change is deeply unpopular. The Institute of Fiscal Studies showed that we've had 8% cuts in the NHS budget over the last few years. We're likely to have another 8% cuts at the same time as cost pressures are rising 2% every year. Mm-hmm. So the financial pressures are intense.
They are.
And your position seems to be that no change is an option.
No, we've not said no change, but what we've said is that any change that is introduced has to enable people to access services within a reasonable distance from their homes. I don't accept, and the government has said time and time and time again, that these changes are not related to cost pressures, that these changes will actually end up costing more to implement. They may not over the long term, but in the short term, they certainly will. So it's not being driven by the cuts. These plans have been in place for almost a decade. We halted them once in 2007. If you talk to clinicians, and I have, there's been a clear downgrading of facilities over a period of time. Training facilities have been downgraded. So this plan has been in the pipeline since way before
Isn't that because there's less money?
Crash.
Isn't it, the cuts are a stark fact in this debate, aren't they?
They are. The cuts can't be ignored. But I'm not convinced that this is the best way to go about things, because where is the cost? Where are the additional costs going to bear down? They're going to bear down on the people who have to pay for a taxi to get from Hirwaun to Cardiff to access accident and emergency system. And you're talking about taking extra money from people who don't have any to begin with. So it comes back to the very basic question around the whole politics of austerity. Who is paying for the mistakes of the crash? It should not be the people who are on the lowest incomes, and that is what's happening at the moment, and that's what I think Plaid Cymru certainly has got a duty to speak out against.
Okay, final question from me, going back to where we started, and the awkward teenage Leanne Wood. What would that Leanne Wood make of the Leanne Wood that she'd have heard tonight, do you think? What would your young self think about how you are now?
That's a good question. I don't know if she'd even recognise it, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I'll have to reflect on that and give you an answer the next time we do this, Lee.
Perhaps you can tweet me.
Maybe I'll do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.